Shawnee State Forest is Ohio's largest recreation area, covering more than 63,000 acres in Scioto and Adams counties. Many of Shawnee's hills rise to nearly 1,200 feet, and the Ohio River winds around the region on the south. Shawnee's heavily forested ridges and misty valleys are reminiscent of the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, giving this area the nickname Little Smokies of Ohio. Thousands of visitors enjoy the solitude, wilderness, and recreation of the state forest every year. 200 miles of roads and trails for hiking, backpacking, sightseeing, and horseback riding crisscross the forest. The forest is also a resource for a renewable product, timber. Some of the finest hardwoods in the world grow in Ohio. Ohio state forests are managed to ensure a healthy and sustainable resource. However, even the best efforts can be thwarted when the weather goes awry.
DNR Division of Forestry says this weekend's ice storm has downed thousands of trees in Shawnee State Forest.
Before they know the full extent of the damage to the Shawnee. Many roads are blocked.
One of the worst winter storms to hit Ohio in several years occurred during Valentine's Day weekend in 2003. Ben Hamilton has been manager of the Shawnee State Forest for a number of years. He knows its features and moods like an old friend.
The rain actually began on Valentine's Day, which was a Friday, and it continued through the weekend. And it began to freeze on Saturday night, the 15th, and then by morning we noticed limbs beginning to break out of the trees around the yard and up in the forest behind the house. So the ice continued to form, the rain continued to fall, and then not only limbs began to fall, but small trees, and after a while, big trees. And as I thought about what could be going on throughout the forest, I thought, we could be in for a catastrophe here, because if this is going on throughout the forest, we could have backpackers out, we could have hunters out, forest visitors, and that sort of thing.
Freezing rain and snow had turned the Shawnee into an ice palace, and the weather didn't let up for several more days. The ice storm that hit southern Ohio caused what might be the biggest natural disaster to ever hit Ohio's state forests.
I don't think anybody imagined the scope of what was about to happen. We've all experienced ice forming on trees and seen an isolated tree go down here and there during an ice storm, or power go out, or that sort of thing. But this cast such a broad net over southern Ohio that it wasn't just restricted to my yard or the Shawnee State Forest, but all up and down the Ohio River in actually a 3-state area.
A 10-mile wide belt of damage had been ripped through more than 70 miles of southern Ohio. Portions of the forest looked like a hurricane had gone through. The heavy ice coating, 2 inches thick in some areas, toppled trees, snapped branches, and downed power lines.
The trees were literally falling at the same rate or faster than what they'd been all day. It was just a constant crash of trees, and it got worse.
Hundreds of thousands of trees, mostly hardwoods, uprooted or splintered under the crushing weight of the ice. When the storm had passed, foresters began making assessments.
One of our partners in the cleanup effort, particularly with the trails, was the Nature Conservancy, and the Division of Forestry works closely with them in Ohio with the Ohio chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And one thing they said off the bat was that this was a natural event, not particularly a disaster. And they're correct in the sense that it was a natural event. It was not caused by people or anything. It rained, the ice formed, the trees fell, and that's true. But it was hard to deny as you drove through the forest and saw the impact not only on the trees and the trails, but also on the power lines and the houses. It was hard not to call it a disaster.
Everywhere you looked, you were confronted by a devastating tangle of downfall. Trees were stripped, shredded, and uprooted, creating an impenetrable wall of severely damaged forest. All recreational use of the forest was immediately suspended because of the blocked trails and unsafe conditions. The force of the storm affected the counties of Adams, Belmont, Monroe, Morgan, Noble, Scioto, Lawrence, Jackson, Gallia, and Meigs, as well as parts of West Virginia and Kentucky. On March 14th, some of the counties were declared federal emergency areas and became eligible for disaster relief.
The February ice storms killed and damaged thousands of trees at Shawnee State Forest in Ohio.
Forestry crews immediately began clearing roads and assisting residents. But the biggest challenge was organizing enough people to clear the forest. Damage of this magnitude called for a flexible response. So the crew that was assembled was certainly unique. Workers were drawn from forestry offices, volunteer groups, and several logging companies, with assistance rendered by a mule team and a helicopter.
There's a problem with wildfires from the brush and the debris in the woods. The large logs make it very difficult to fight fires and to be able to take care of wildfire concerns. At the same time, that brush and debris cause a problem for recreationists to get out into the woods to use the trails, as well as for hunters who are after game in the woods. It's important for us to go out and clear the woods. It makes good financial sense. We can take care of the salvage of the large timber, and it's a good insurance policy against wildfires and other concerns.
Shawnee was lucky in that it already had a volunteer base with a history of support. 4 volunteer groups were assigned to clear trails with light damage, and they joined together to spend hundreds of hours in the woods. Boy Scout Troop Number 12 worked 200 hours on the backpack trail in the wilderness area.
I was looking for an Eagle Scout project and talked to Ben Hamilton, the forest ranger out here at Shawnee, and he said that they needed the wilderness area cleared off, so I said I'll do that. And then come to find out you can only use hand tools and anything not gas powered and stuff like that, so it turned out to be a pretty tough project. We used saws, axes, sickles to clear it off. We got up there and we thought that it wasn't going to be that bad, and there was about a tree every 2 feet, and it's been tough.
The Ohio Horsemen's Council gave nearly 400 hours to clear bridle trails around the horse camp, working from March through Memorial Day. In just 3 months, they cleared 30 miles of bridle trails, allowing the horse camp at Bear Lake to reopen for Memorial Day weekend.
We went in and started cutting, and it was just really more of a challenge than we even thought it would be, but we accomplished quite a bit. We were just glad to be a part of it and see things open back up and get things back on the right track.
The Buckeye Trail Association donated 1,000 plus hours on 14 miles of the Buckeye North Country Shawnee Backpack Trail, part of which was in the wilderness area.
The Buckeye Trail Association maintains 1,280 miles of trail that circumnavigates the state of Ohio. It happens to cross through the Shawnee Forest, and as a result of the ice storm, we had this trail was completely blocked. This has been a major undertaking for us and a cooperative effort between us and the State Forestry Department.
The Nature Conservancy donated 250 hours on the backpack trail.
Our interest in this not only is to help get this work done, but also to look at the way that these events occur in today's landscape. So our interest is to watch how an event like this will impact the forests as we have them today.
In the 8,000-acre wilderness area, logs 20 inches in diameter were blocking the backpack and bridle trails. This was especially challenging since state law stipulates that no motorized vehicles or equipment can be used in the wilderness area. The problem was solved by hiring a local contractor who used a team of mules to remove hundreds of logs and treetops. Logs were whittled down to size the old-fashioned way with 5-foot crosscut saws, bow saws, and chopping axes. It took crews 5 weeks to clear 10 miles of trails. The more heavily damaged areas required professional logging crews because of the number and size of the downed trees. 6 logging companies, through timber sale agreements with the Division of Forestry, cleared debris from 70 miles of forest roads. They operate under Ohio's Forest Initiative. These logging crews were limited to roadside salvage. A skidder brought the trees to a loading area. Then a apprentice loader picked them up, held them to a buck saw where they were cut to size, and placed the logs on a truck bed.
After the ice storm happened, our foresters went about assessing the amount of damage on the forest, and it was significant. We found that there were literally millions of dollars of timber laying on the ground or in standing damaged trees, and we took a proactive approach by trying to salvage as much of that timber as possible.
Some of the most heavily damaged areas were in the forest interior and on steep slopes. This presented another thorny question for salvage crews. The solution was to sign a timber agreement with Superior Hardwoods of Ohio, who contracted with Carson Helicopter to provide a Sikorsky S-61 helicopter. Helicopter logging is more expensive than traditional methods, but in terms of efficiency, it can't be beat. Additional benefits are gained in that no skid roads needed to be built, and there's little impact to the forest floor. When it was all said and done, all 130 miles of roads and bridle trails were open by fall. The Backpack Trail reopened in March 2004. A total of 12.1 million board feet were harvested, sold, or put up for bid.
The undergrowth immediately begins to flourish and fill in those voids that were left behind by the trees. So now the composition of the forest is a little different in terms of the size of the trees and the scope of the forest as a whole, but it's growing back, and that's really the refreshing thing to see. It's all coming back on its own.
The forest is resilient. The composition will change and the habitat will change. The undergrowth and wildlife diversity will change. And in the end, Shawnee State Forest has been put back together for all of us and the future.